Ready? You have the cameras rolling?
Welcome to Outspoken.
This better be good.
A show about
floods, mutant, plagues, man-eating plants.
Actually, it's about thought-provoking, compelling conversations with people who have something important to say, a good story to tell, or knowledge we can learn from.
Oh, good for you!
And now,
Hold on to your butts.
here's Scott and Curtis.
Hello and welcome to the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis. I'm Scott, and of course with us is Curtis.
Hey Scott, good to be with you.
Good to be with you too. So today we have a really special guest. It's our pleasure to welcome seven-time USA national champion gymnast, seven-time national team gymnast, 1986 all-around USA national champion in gymnastics, producer and participant in the documentary Athlete A, about the sexual abuse of child athletes at USA Gymnastics, a former Levi's brand president, and now best-selling author of Levi's Unbuttoned, The Woke Mob Took My Job But Gave Me My Voice. So folks, please welcome Jennifer Sey.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Jennifer. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you.
Glad to be here.
It's, after... we have to understand, Curtis and I are a bit older, but, you're still so young, but what a crazy, insane, exciting, eventful life already. I mean, from gymnastics at the highest level to navigating corporate America, which Curtis and I know is not easy, to writing 2 books, to being in film. What a journey and a metamorphosis. And as you, what do you feel as you, or what do you see as you look back across your career so far? And what do you think when you look back on that?
Wow. Well, I'm not so young, so that's the first part. But, I think what I've tried to do in my life is do things that I love. Follow, I've never been one driven by money or title. Clearly, I gave all that up recently, some would say in a foolish fashion, although I stand by it. And I've just always sort of pursued the things that I love doing. I mean, the one exception would be when I started my career in corporate America, I really did not want to do that. I was a very reluctant participant, and I assumed I would have exited much sooner. It wasn't what I wanted to do, but I'm also very proud. And in 1992, when I graduated from college and we were in the midst of a recession, I was having a hard time making a living. I did end up taking the first full-time job I could get, which was at an advertising agency, and eventually ended up working on Levi's there. But I just, I wanted to make my own way. I didn't want help from my parents. And I also recognized in myself, because I was doing a lot of contracting work before that, and working in production on commercials and films, because that's what I thought I wanted to do. But that is very inconsistent work. And I didn't do well with the inconsistency. It made me very anxious. I needed to know that I had a paycheck coming. And so I started on that path reluctantly, but quickly found I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the culture in the agency. It's a lot of young people. It's creative. It's fun. I got to sort of exercise both the creative and analytical parts of my brain. So I kept going. But the night I accepted my first job in advertising, I remember saying to my however many roommates I had at the time in San Francisco, it was a lot. I hope I'm not doing this in 5 years. And what do you know? 30 years later, I was still oops. But besides that, and I did end up really loving it. And I stayed at Levi's for a very long time, close to 23 years, which is quite unusual in the world today, because I loved it and I loved the culture. And I felt like I could make a meaningful contribution to the trajectory of this iconic brand. But I continued to pursue other things I loved, whether it was my own advocacy or eventually writing a book, my first one in 2008, and making a film that came out in 2020. I always just did what I loved. And if that meant I had to work like crazy and had no balance in my life for a time, I'm not a big believer in balance in any given moment. I think you achieve that over time. And other times, work was sort of more on a back burner or side burner, I should say. And I spent more time on my family. You achieve, like I said, balance over time, not in any given moment. That's my belief.
Did the competition that you experienced at gymnastics did that translate well to that climb in the corporate world?
I think it is sort of reverse of that, which is that I'm probably quite a competitive person, although I try to kind of tamp that down sometimes. Because I think it can be self-destructive if you don't manage it in the right way. So, I think I'm probably a competitive person naturally. I think being competitive was reinforced because it worked in gymnastics. It made me disciplined and hardworking. And if I failed, I just got up and dusted myself off and kept going. And so I think it's more that it's inherent in me, but it was reinforced through gymnastics. My watch outs are different in that I think I can be so competitive or goal driven that I can sometimes ignore when a situation no longer serves me very well and is in fact destructive for me. And I will keep going because I set a goal for myself and I said I was going to do it, so I'm going to do it. And sometimes we have to reevaluate and reassess if perhaps the situation has become, doesn't serve us well anymore as individuals.
But still a great example for perseverance. But I will say, I had a chance to read your book, Levi's Unbuttoned, and I loved your writing style. I thought it was, it's not often that you see a writing style that's so direct and honest, and it feels as a reader like you're just unabashedly you. Like, here I am, take me as I am. This is who I am, and it's a really cool style.
That's really kind. I can't say I've received a nicer compliment. I'm a very avid reader, and I appreciate a writing style such as that. So to know that I, at least in your mind, was able to achieve it means a lot. I tried to do the same in my first book with Chalked Up. I think, I love memoir. I find them quite helpful and inspiring. And I find it interesting to read about a world and a life that is very different from one's own, but that perhaps you can still draw lessons and inspiration from. But at the end of the day, with a memoir, to me, it is also about the quality of the writing. And so I took great care, and it makes me happy that you would say that.
So tell us about,
that's quite in contrast, is it not, to some of the writing you see in corporate world?
I can't read any of it. It used to be a joke at work that I don't read, like anytime anyone said, "Oh, have you read this business book or that?" No, I don't read them. I do not read them. I think they're stupid. Usually the whole point of the book is summed up in the introduction and like the first 3 pages, and you don't have to read anymore. The quality of the writing is terrible, and I can't read something that bad. So I don't read business books, and that, well, certainly now I won't, but I certainly never did in the past. And it was sort of a running joke in the company. Yeah, Jen didn't read that.
So tell us in the book, there's 2 primary taboo issues that you took on, and maybe tell us how they alter your trajectory in your career and your life.
In your mind, what are those 2 primary taboo issues?
The 2 things that you talk about in the book, the 2 things you confronted, the shutdown of the schools due to COVID, and then later on the vaccine mandates and taking those on. I think those were the 2 big things that.
Yeah, I mean, the primary one was school closures as well as other restrictions to children. And to be clear, and I was outspoken from the very beginning, and outspoken, first started on social media, but it eventually evolved, and I wrote op-eds, and I was on news programs, and I led rallies and attended school board meetings. So it wasn't just, keyboard warrior activism. I was really trying to have my voice heard in the real world as well. And I focused my advocacy on children, though I will say I was very concerned and opposed, I should say, to lockdowns from the beginning as an ineffective and draconian measure that would not really work, didn't, and would cause all of this other, undue harm. So, but I avoided that subject because I knew how taboo it would be. I thought if I focused on children that we could all find, it was sort of like a gateway lockdown issue, children.
Makes sense.
And I thought we might be able to, we collectively, community in San Francisco, where I lived at the time, San Francisco public schools were closed for 18 months. Playgrounds were closed for close to 10. The restrictions on children go on and on and on. I thought I could build a bridge. And I thought, even though this was controversial, perhaps it would be acceptable because it was children that I was talking about, and specifically disadvantaged children. 60% of the student population in San Francisco Unified is low income. They're disproportionately Black and brown. And this is during 2020 when everybody was very concerned, as we should be, about fighting systemic racism, et cetera. And I just saw these school closures as the sort of ultimate epitome of systemic classism and racism, especially because the private schools attended by mostly wealthy, if not all, white students did open in the fall of 2020, and the public schools stayed closed for another full year. So this was taboo. This was the official policy of the Democratic Party, I should say, that we should lock down schools and
playgrounds.
And really everything until what, I'm not sure, because they kept changing the endpoint. At first it was to slow the spread, then it was the hospitals were overwhelmed, then it was till vaccines, then it was teachers got the vaccines, but everybody needed the vaccines. It just kept going on and on and on. And nobody seemed to care that they kept moving the goalpost and that children were being harmed in the process. And so, I had a history of advocating for children, first in sport and the Olympic movement. And I saw this very much as an extension of that. I was told repeatedly over the course of 2 years that I could not or should not speak out on this issue by my peers, fellow executives, as well as my boss, the CEO. And I said, no, I'm going to. And so we came to we came to a crossroads. And
it's a nice way of putting it, crossroads.
Yeah, we came to a crossroads. So after close to 2 years of me being very outspoken on this subject, and the irony is, at the time when I was told there was no longer a job for me, after close to 2 years, I was told that I couldn't work there anymore. This is when I would say there was more widespread agreement about the fact that the school closures were indeed very harmful and unnecessary. So I was pushed out just at the moment that there was some degree of majority agreement that I, in fact, was right.
And so, Jen, I think it's important we set the stage for our viewers here. You were not just an executive in Levi.
That's right.
You were in the running. You were one of 2 or 3 candidates for CEO to succeed Chip Bergh.
Yeah,
right?
I was a very successful CMO. That sounds self-congratulatory to say that, but
you were in the role for 8 years. When that, the average tenure was like what, 24 months?
Yeah, it's about 24 months, and I was the CMO for 8 years. I was one of Forbes' most influential CMOs 2 years in a row. Definitely, by Chip and other members of the leadership team, was credited with getting the brand back on track and leading us to a successful IPO. So, I'll use the words of others to convey whether or not I was successful in the role, but most people don't last 8 years, to your point. Yeah. And even amidst my advocacy, which was controversial, that I was promoted during that time. I was promoted to brand president in October of 2020. So I moved from overseeing marketing to all of product design, merchandising, store design, marketplace insights, all of our value brands, which again is a testament to the fact that I was doing a good job. And during my tenure as brand president, we came out of COVID at a very accelerated rate. Obviously, the business was challenged during the lockdowns. Our stores were all closed. I mean, our business at one point in the summer or in the spring of 2020, I think, was down 70% versus prior year. These are not numbers you ever expect to see or hear in your lifetime. This is a scary time for lots of reasons.
Especially just after an IPO.
Yeah, I mean, not long after, only about a year after our IPO. But based on the strength of the brand that we had built over the prior 10 years, we felt we could emerge strong. And we did. We emerged strong, and we're on a great trajectory. The stock actually doubled from its low during COVID when I took over as brand president. So, I say all of this to just point to the fact that I was doing a good job. I was promoted to brand president. And yes, at that point I was told, or a few months into my brand presidency, I was told that I was one of 2 candidates for CEO. There are folks in the online universe that doubt that and suggest I was only pushed out the door because I was terrible at my job. But even like, take me out of it. My role, and you know this, you work in business, my role was an obvious succession role,
Right.
for CEO. So yeah, I was, but at the time that I was told I was a clear candidate, I was also told it was contingent on me piping down on this particular issue. To answer the second part of your question around vax mandates, I was restrained in my commentary on the mandates because Levi's does have a vax mandate, and I got vaccinated because we had a vax mandate. I don't think they're right. I think they're discriminatory. I think at this point, we could clearly say rather ineffective, since the vaccine doesn't prevent infection or transmission. Levi still has a vaccine mandate now.
They still have it. Wow.
They still have it. And there are employees that have been fired for, declining. I was fairly restrained. I did articulate there, and some of the tweets I deleted because I was asked to, that these policies were discriminatory, especially in schools that were planning to implement them. The vaccine uptake amongst minority students was the lowest, Black students, Hispanic students. And so implementing a vaccine mandate would have effectively meant banning 40% of children, for instance, in LA Unified. Now, they walked it back when they realized that was not going to spur uptake, but it would just end up banning students of color essentially from public education. So, since I don't have a job anymore, I am more outspoken on this matter. But I was careful. Obviously, I'm an executive in the company. I'm an officer in the company, and I recognize that to vociferously and publicly advocate against company policy is problematic, which is why also regarding the masking issue, I really spoke of it just as it pertained to very young children. I have a 6-year-old. She was 3 when this started. She spent a third of her life in a mask, looking at other people in masks. And I think this is harmful, especially for young children. And let's be clear, ineffective. I mean, for a young child wearing a Peppa Pig mask with huge gaps in the side, who still wears a diaper and puts her shoes on the wrong feet, I find it hard to believe that this is actually doing anything. And oh, by the way, she gets to take it off at nap time, at preschool. So I was outspoken about that. I was chastised for that was a violation of company policy. But as far as I know, we don't have any toddlers, or we didn't have any toddlers working at Levi. So I saw that as something outside of company policy.
Doesn't the whole thing strike you, Jennifer, as just kabuki theater? I mean, the facts are in so many situations. The facts are in, and really, even from the beginning, unless we were all walking around in tight sealed gas masks that covered every orifice,
which doesn't seem reasonable. Yeah,
and the lack of curiosity, just a complete lack of curiosity and interest in the data.
It was from the very start. Lock it down. Lock down any dissent. This is the policy. It was cult-like. This is the policy. Lockdowns will work. Masking, even though leading up to this, it was widely acknowledged would not work to prevent the spread of respiratory viruses. Fauci kept saying, yes, but there's new information now. There was no new information. The new information was he just said it. It was religious dogma, and anyone who questioned was a heretic and was banished from the cult, essentially. And I dared to question. The lack of curiosity, that's a nice way to put it. I think it was, I believe it was it was more sinister than that, excuse me, especially now that we see through, the Twitter files, there was government intervention to silence everyday citizens, even doctors, who challenged these policies. That's pretty sinister, if you ask me.
Oh yeah, including one of your esteemed alum, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya over at Stanford.
A friend and a fellow alum. He was blacklisted from the day he joined Twitter. He joined in the summer of 21 and was blacklisted on the very day because he had published, excuse me, the Great Barrington Declaration, which suggested or recommended that focused protection of the vulnerable was more effective.
Yeah, along with 3 other epidemiologists, and perhaps the most renowned epidemiologist in the world at the time, over in Britain.
Sinatra, yeah.
So the sinister part, there's we can peel back that in a bit, but isn't it interesting to you about how many people will put an emotional stake in a position based on a headline, rather than peeling back the data? Because it was very obvious in your book, you do what both Curtis and I do, which is you read the headline and go, and then you look at the article, and then you find the link to the study in the article, and then you might link to reviews of that. I mean, and you look at the
click
data
on the footnotes. Yeah, it was all there.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, and to use an example, it's in all of the quote unquote studies from Pfizer and Moderna that the vaccines were never tested for whether or not they prevented transmission or not. And yet that didn't stop folks like the head of the CDC or the CEO at Pfizer from saying that it did. Now, why? Okay, I can sort of wrap my head around everyday folks like you and me not just believing the headlines, right? And not necessarily having the time or the wherewithal to dig through the studies to find that. But journalists, I have big beef with journalists, specifically, science reporters. They took press releases from Pfizer and wrote headlines and articles from them. If I could click on the studies and the footnotes, why couldn't the science reporter from the New York Times? They carried water
releases, right? Instead of
it's a press release, and they carried water for big pharma, and the government carried water for big pharma. It was this, they all acted in lockstep. And the crazy part was, if you did actually do the reading like I did, and it sounds like you did, you got accused with very silly memes of doing your own research. And, the folks who listened intently to NPR and CNN, which were spewing propaganda, essentially, they felt confident that they were doing their own research, when in fact they did no such thing. They read the chyrons on CNN.
By the way, we've got to head to a break here in a second, but
yeah,
I do want to make one comment that's less serious. Is I did think it was pretty cool that in one book, pretty close to each other, you quoted Dave Chappelle and Thomas Sowell in like a short span. I thought that was pretty cool. Not many people can claim that. It's very cool.
Cool.
2 of my favorite comedians and philosophers.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
I'll
so
quote is
hilarious.
Twitter's not a real place, right?
Yeah.
That was the quote from Chappelle. He's right. And yet, it has real life impact.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, we're going to take a quick break and be right back with our esteemed guest, and Jennifer Sey. Don't go away.
Are you tired of working outside in the heat? Do you hate your boss? Do you want to get paid to sit on your ass and talk for a living? Well, if you answered yes to the last question, then voiceover might be for you. But if you think it's as easy as buying a microphone, hooking it up to your computer, and all of a sudden you're gonna get paid, think again. It's just like your mom told you. You gotta go to school.
You gotta go to school.
And you need to talk to actor, voice actor, director, and producer Jonathan McFadden of Prodigy Talent Training.
I'm Jonathan McFadden.
Jonathan works in the business, so he knows the ins and outs, and he can help you excel in the field you want to. Audiobooks, animation, video games, radio ads, and of course, voiceover. But you can't wait around because classes fill up fast. So get over to calendly.com/prodigytt. Yeah, that's a weird word. Here, I'll spell it. calendly.com/prodigytt. Click new student interview and pick a time that works for you. So listen to your mom and go to Prodigy Talent Training.
You gotta go to school.
And we're back on the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis, and our guest today, we're pleased to welcome Jennifer Sey, former everything. Former Olympic, national
Olympic level
gymnast,
gymnast,
Olympic level gymnast. Yes.
author,
Movie
actor,
producer,
or
corporate CMO, just you name it. You've lived enough for 3 lifetimes here, Jen.
and look, and you know what? I think that, the gymnastics, I think, is definitely foundational, but just that climb up the corporate ladder through the toughness and the wherewithal to make it up that high, I think that's the one of the coolest things. I mean, for me, that's just amazing, because that is tough.
It's a tough climb. I mean, one of the things I was trying to do in the book, I mean, there is a lot about my last 2 years at Levi's and the conflict, but it really is also a memoir about being a woman in corporate America and coming up the ladder in the 90s and 2000s. And it did require a lot of persistence and resilience, as you say. It wasn't easy. And I think it's a testament to the fact that in many ways it has gotten better. A lot of the stories I describe at Levi's even, it's sort of unthinkable that some of those things would happen now. Things like naked chicken fights at a sales meeting, which actually happened. It was a very storied event in Levi. Anyone who's been there more than 20 years knows the story. Or, even just the fact that, because in addition to all that other stuff, I have 4 children. I had them all while I was at Levi's. And my first child was born in 2000. And when I returned to work after only 6 weeks, because you didn't get mat leave or family leave or anything, I had to pump milk in a sample closet with an unlocked door. That's sort of unthinkable now. I mean, I think that California companies at least are required to have adequate facilities. So, in many ways, it is a testament to how far we've come, because I think things are much better now.
Well, I'd like to spend just a minute on that if we could, Jen. In our introductions, Scott and I, in our typically male chauvinistic way, laid out all your accomplishments in sports and business and movies and authorship, and forgot to mention your most important job, which I'm sure to you is being a mother. And so for you to do all of these things in the corporate world, as you said, while birthing and raising 4 kids, shockingly, shocking accomplishment. But I'd like if you could to just unpack that, what it's like for a woman to climb the corporate ladder these days. We are starting to see a bit more female leadership at the top. I will say, I've been consulting for about 30 years. I've been an employee, been an exec, been, entrepreneur for a long time. 2 of the very best companies to this day that I've ever worked with or for have been female led. And I mean, top female leadership, and not just, token leadership here and there. I mean, the rank and file
all the way through.
All the way through. And I'm wondering if you think, so I'd like you to unpack a little bit about that journey. And then secondly, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think with more female leadership in these companies, for example, if Levi's had been one of these companies, with more female leadership, would you have encountered the same type of resistance, or do you think there would have been more tolerance for varied viewpoints?
On COVID specifically?
Mm-hmm.
I think COVID is a weird, unique beast in this regard.
Polarizing, isn't it?
It just, I mean, I wrote a piece, or MSNBC published an excerpt from my book about my climb as a woman up the ladder, and they headlined it. I don't think I wrote the headline, as is usually the case. Would this have happened would she have been ousted if she weren't a woman? And I can certainly say at many points in my career, I would have been promoted sooner. I would have faced less friction and challenge as I, based on results that I was delivering. It took me a really long time to move from job to job. And there are many, many studies that show men get promoted into their potential and women get promoted only after they've proven they can do the job, which is, a real delay in how sort of quickly you can move up the ladder. And there's real sort of pay implications to that, obviously, if men are getting promoted and on average 18 months. And for women, it's taking whatever, 2, 3, 5 years, the lifetime salary implications for that are pretty significant. And so one of the things I've always encouraged is when you're looking at pay equity inside of a company, which is a very, popular thing to do now, don't just compare like jobs to see if men and women are paid equally. You have to look at that rate of promotion as well, because I would argue the lifetime impacts of delayed promotions are greater from a salary perspective than a little bit of inequity at the same level. I actually don't, in regards to COVID, I'm not so sure it would have made a difference. It's hard to describe. I don't know where you both live, but in it's extremely left-leaning city like San Francisco, I mean, it felt like I was the only one. It felt like my husband and I were the only ones. I mean, it was just, there was no dissent tolerated.
Jennifer, I left California about 7 years ago because I just had enough. Because I was one of those people that was a constant dissenter, and I just was getting frustrated. I was down in Southern California, but I grew up in San Luis Obispo, and it's the same thing there. Just very different. And I'm in Florida now, and so our lockdown time was pretty short, and the recovery was very fast. And there was and I had COVID early. So, but anyway,
and I'm in Austin, Texas, so our lockdown time was
okay.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, you guys are in. Okay. So I'll ask you to use your imagination as to what it was like in San Francisco. I mean, and the thing is it's not just because I was very careful in how I expressed dissent. It was always in the form of a question. Are we sure this is the right
I thought your
thing?
tweets were very realistic. They weren't inflammatory necessarily. They were just they were posing questions, or they were very, very calm. A calm way. You weren't rabid or anything crazy.
In fact, it's interesting because on Twitter in particular, all of us sort of open schoolers and anti-lockdowners, we found each other quickly. There were very few that questioned from the very beginning. And my reputation among that group was that I was sort of tepid. Like, what, why you're not, say something, you don't even say anything controversial. And by 2021, I definitely had accrued some trolls. And, within my open schoolers group, they were like, we don't even understand it. You don't even say anything that interesting or controversial. But it was by virtue. I mean, I was careful because of my position. Mm-hmm. I also tend to just communicate in a more diplomatic way to try to build bridges and understanding. And even in the manner I was communicating.
That building bridges and understanding worked well for you?
In the workplace, obviously, it didn't end well for me. I didn't really build that bridge.
No, I was talking about on Twitter mostly because of the craziness there. There's no talking.
It didn't. But you know what? I have gone through, as I wrote my book, I went back through a lot of my Twitter history, and I stand by all of it. I stand by not just the content, but the tone. I think I was very appropriate. I was grounded in data. I didn't get in stupid fights with people. I tried to kind of stay above the fray. That didn't stop them from calling me all sorts of terrible, unemployable names like a racist and fatphobe and eugenicist. But to me, there was no indication. I am not any of those things.
You know what it
doesn't
did?
matter. What did I do?
I think it amplified the non-tolerance of any dissent. Because
for sure.
Because your tweets were they were pretty calm, and that you took so much crap for them. I mean, that just amplifies that there is no dissent allowed.
Yes, it's just proof that you cannot even question or challenge COVID policy. And I would argue at this point, sadly, I say this as a former Democrat, Democratic Party policy / dogma. You cannot challenge any of it. And that's what was that was what was so eye-opening and shocking to me, is you sort of raise your hand and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe, how about not? And all of a sudden you are billed as an alt-right QAnon insane person with a white hood in the closet. Yeah. It's like they brook no dissent, none whatsoever. It is religious in its fervor, and all challengers must be banished. And the point of this what I've come to understand, is to terrify others into compliance and silence. That is the point. They realize, these trolls, some of whom are paid by the Democratic Party, let's be clear, these trolls, they know they couldn't keep me quiet. I had been at it for 2 years. I lost my job. There's not, obviously I'm intransigent, but I will tell you, it kept a lot of people quiet. And so the consent around lockdowns and closures, it was manufactured by silencing the vast majority of people who might have had a question.
Yeah.
Yes. That's one thing Scott and I have grappled with from both an executive point of view and from a consulting point of view. I often have said the resource most lacking in any corporation is leadership courage.
Yeah. No, yeah.
And I think you are a fine example of leadership courage. And I'm curious. I mean, followed Chip Berg for a little while as well, and it was, frankly, very surprised at the outcome. At the outcome of things. Perhaps I shouldn't be. I don't know him personally, so I can't say that I know him well or anything. But I was surprised at the outcome with regard to his handling of you expressing your opinion, your not company's opinion, and First Amendment rights. And what I think you were doing was trying to couch it in a very palatable way. You're advocating for children. Your voice of reasonable dissent, not even dissent as much as just questioning, and just to have so many of these corporations silence that behavior. I know we've all three of us have traveled around the world, and I can tell you when I go to other countries, any other country, even European countries, I am on best behavior, folks, because I don't know all the laws.
Right.
But there are certain countries I know that I'm going to be real careful about what I say in public about leadership, government,
Yeah. Don't talk in China. It's bad.
That's right. China, India, a lot of Africa, there's a lot of places, right? But I've never, ever would have thought that sort of,
existed here.
Maoist youth kind of behavior would come to America. It's like really shocking.
It is here. I mean, people, if they don't see it, they're not paying attention. And what is alarming to me is way too many sort of see it and think it's okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, I got a message from someone just today. What do you think? What did you think would happen? You can't say these things if you want to have a job. And I'm like, and you're okay with that? You can't calmly challenge government policy and expect that you would still have a job. I mean, the fact is, and I hate to make it so binary, but I challenged the Democratic Party policy. If I had been waving and screaming my arms that we had to lock down schools forever until there was no more COVID, I would still have a job.
Yep.
So, and that idea that you can't, I mean, if I were a self-avowed Republican, does that mean I can't have a job? Because I got the question at work, are you with us or against us? That's not so subtle code for, are you blue or are you red?
That's crazy.
They felt there was an enemy in their midst. This was said to me as well. An enemy being a Republican, which I'm not even, but so what if I was? Am I not allowed to be one and hold a job? And why are people okay with that? They're kind of okay with that. People are willing to trade for a feeling of safety and belonging. They are willing to trade freedom, it seems to me. And I find this alarming. And I couldn't fathom such a thing in my lifetime in this country. I'd certainly heard about it in the Soviet Union and East Germany, and people telling on their family and neighbors and turning them into the Stasi. That's what, in San Francisco, we had the police called on us by neighbors and everyday citizens because they thought, as a family, a large family of 6, that we were gathering outside in the park with people outside of our household.
Jeez.
They called the police, and we had to prove that we all had the same address.
Wow.
Do the parallels strike you as a little bit scary, a little bit interesting between something else you did, which was Athlete A, and how dissent was silenced in that case as well? And so it caused it to extend it for an extensive amount of time after the allegations first came out about abuse.
It's completely analogous. It's 100% analogous, a much smaller scale.
Yeah.
When no dissent or challenge is tolerated, it is because the argument and the defense of the side being intolerant is they don't have a case. Their only hope to maintain their image, reputation, their story, their narrative is to silence anyone that challenges it, because it falls apart when you pull the thread. It falls apart.
And thank goodness
it
you
is
guys
always,
did.
It is always to protect the reputations and the wallets of the powerful. That may not seem as clear in gymnastics, but the reputation is being protected when as high up as the US Olympic Committee and the International Olympic Committee. There were very powerful people who were furthering a narrative that gymnastics was filled with shiny, happy, cute little pixies, and that's what generated the ad dollars. Anyone who said that's not true was vilified.
You know, basically. Curtis says this a lot, but whenever you bump up against somebody's bonus for the money, then you're really in tough territory. And same here. It's just
me. And to answer your question, or not question, but your comment about Chip, and it's a good way to put it. I was bumping up against his bonus, or so he was told by other leaders, my peers, the head of HR and the head of corporate communication, who said I was a reputational risk. And I was bumping up against his legacy, which is something he talks about a lot and is quite focused on. Ironically, at least part of the legacy now will be having ousted me for wrongthink, which certainly is not what he wants to be part of his legacy.
Yeah, hopefully it comes back later on and that becomes an example of the wrong way to advance a company. I really hope the pendulum swings back at some point, because we're in this, I happen to have my formative years in the 80s, and the 80s were very much about performance. They didn't care about your stripes. And then that kind of changed. And as you were coming into the marketplace in the 90s and then now, and hopefully it'll swing back the other way. I hope so.
Well, I think, I do think, free speech is at real risk in this country. And like I said, what is most alarming to me is younger generations seem sort of okay with it. Speech is violence. Certain speech is too dangerous to be allowed. I will give up my rights, or more to the point, take yours away in exchange for a feeling of safety. So I think that's sort of taken over, that talk of safe spaces and all of that has taken over corporate America. But for all the talk, that's all in the service of diversity and inclusion. And I do think companies that are more diverse will perform better. They're more reflective of their consumer base. But inclusion has to include viewpoint inclusion,
right?
Political party and belief inclusion, religious affiliation. I mean, if you're a religious person in a very left-leaning company, I can only imagine, I'm not one, it would be very uncomfortable to make that known.
Well, that's a great point, Jennifer. I think diversity has come to be shorthand for race and ethnicity. And that's really not the diversity that we want in companies. We want, as you said, diversity of opinion, diversity of experience, diversity of viewpoint. If you have African American person, and an Asian American person and a Caucasian American person, and they've all been in the same company for 25 years, they're not going to have very diverse opinions.
This is where maybe I differ. I'm not really sure I get this. So maybe I have a little bit different opinion than you guys, because like I said, I was formed more in the 80s, and in the 80s, from my experience in very large companies, the diversity was, we hired the best person for the job, regardless of the stripes. We didn't really care. It was that, and that drove a natural diversity, which included, females at the highest executive levels in my multi-billion-dollar company, not mine, but the one I was in. And it fueled just a variety of backgrounds because they were the best people for the job.
That always has to come first. I would never argue that point. But if you're always recruiting from the same places and you're always recruiting the friends of your friends, and you're not going to have diversity of experience and background. There for a long time, look, the Gap and Levi's are like a mile apart on the Embarcadero. For a long time, it was just sort of like this moving sidewalk between the two. And I said at a certain point, if you bring, when I was hiring, if you bring me one more person, I don't want to see any more people from the Gap. This is not diversifying our knowledge base. It's just the same thing over and over. Was there a lack of actual, racial diversity within that? Yes, of course. But it was also just a lack of diversity of experience and knowledge and a way of looking at problems and challenges. And I said, in marketing, as the CMO, I don't even just want people from apparel. I want people from the music industry. I want people from all sorts of different industries and backgrounds. And that will also, by the way, diversify in terms of race, educational experience, gender. But, when you're just kind of trading employees between Gap and probably some from Ralph Lauren, which was across the country, but we had a lot there too. There was just, everyone looked at every problem in the same way.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I mean. Of course, the person has to be eminently qualified, but there are people that are really, really qualified that have experience in a different field or come from a different place. The same with our intern program. We started recruiting from a wider range of universities, HBCUs, but also design schools, not just the top 6 Ivy League universities, which tends to have the same sort of profile and pedigree.
Yeah, everybody's got the same, their nose pressed up against the same glass, and they've all got the same purblindness. You start doing that. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back for our final segment with Jennifer Sey. Don't go away.
The Infernal Guard, Book 3, Severance. The 3 pieces of an age-old prophecy have been found, the children who will save the world, until one goes missing. Now it's up to the Guard to find that kidnapped piece of the puzzle, to sever the links between worlds and stop an invasion from the underworld. Will they make it in time? Will this former enemy cooperate, or does her hatred live on? Coming soon wherever audiobooks are sold. Witness the end of the thrilling Infernal Guard trilogy by S.G.D. Singh.
On the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis and our esteemed guest, Jennifer Sey, former CMO of Levi's, and her new book, Levi's Unbuttoned. I started to say Chalked Up, but that's not the new book. But also author of her of the book Chalked Up, which is a memoir of her time at the elite gymnastics level, and just a fascinating story as well. Jennifer, when we left, we were talking about diversity in the corporate workspace and what that truly means. I'm curious, where you left Levi's in 21, right?
22.
22,
January of this year.
22.
Yeah.
Okay. When you left, setting aside the political bugaboos that we've been discussing, are you starting to see other changes in corporate America with regard to educational certifications, qualifications, particularly in the technology world? Software is eating the world, right? And most businesses these days have a strong reliance on some technology stack to deliver some piece of their offering. Are you starting to see a change in what we're looking for in young employees? Are college degrees as important? Are the same types of college degrees as important, or are they more important?
That's a good question. I would say we were actively trying to move away from that sort of typical accreditation that was kind of required, not just in the technology space, but in the creative and design space too. Because often there's really interesting, creative, artful, young people that do not have a traditional degree or perhaps came up and through the world differently. And that requires, though, if you're going to find those folks, that you have to look in different places, to follow up on the conversation we were having before.
They've been too busy making stuff.
yeah, they're too busy making stuff. I mean, I know I have a 22-year-old who's an artist, and I think that his ability does not come from his degree. He just graduated from Berkeley. It comes from the fact that he's been making art since he's 6 years old, and he's a muralist, and he, has all these interesting talents and capabilities. And I think on the other hand, we were trying to also, from a digital capability standpoint, recognize and educate the employee population broadly. So it couldn't just be this thing that the people over here in like AI knew how to do. Like everybody had to understand how it impacted and affected and could perhaps improve their productivity, their work product, et cetera. So we had training programs that anyone could take part in, that kind of thing. It's sort of like the analogy I draw is when, in the early days in marketing, when I was starting out at Levi's, you had a few people that were like your digital marketers. It was like this little team of 3 people. That's sort of unthinkable now, right? The whole marketing team has to be digitally savvy, and not just the email marketing team, not just the paid search team, everybody. So it's sort of like that. You need that digital expertise across every pillar of the company, and you don't necessarily come in with it. I think the other really important thing, at least that I always hired against, was agility, not knowledge. There's no way, what you're going to have to do next year is different than what you have to do today. So I want people who demonstrate an ability to kind of learn things quickly, adapt, a curiosity, because the world is changing so fast that you can't just hire based on like, do you know how to do this thing now? That's insufficient.
I love that. How did you test for that? What were the markers that told you somebody had that agility, that ability to adapt and learn?
I mean, mostly I asked them, because I wasn't a big like take a test to get the job kind of person, but I asked them for examples in their prior history.
Yeah,
just
I love that.
When have you done this?
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer, when in Levi's Unbuttoned, you talk a little bit about the importance of being a good storyteller. Can you? And I love that, because that's something we talk about all the time internally right now at the company that I'm at. And tell us why that's such a critical skill, and how that helped you within Levi's. And it seems to be one of your fortes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing I love doing most, whatever the format, which is why I wrote the 2 books and made a film, and I'm making another. And it's why I loved working at Levi's, because there's a lot of companies where you could be the CMO where storytelling has nothing to do with it. Although I'd argue they'd be better CMOs if they recognize that it did. Yeah. But there are some that are very, they might tell stories about the not stories. They might talk about the product in a solely features and benefits driven way, or it might be a strictly sort of digitally driven role. How do I increase conversion in any way that I can? And they fail to address that broader storytelling potential. This is how we remember things, right? Culturally, this is how we pass on family lore. I always knew that if I could make an ad that resonated deeply, made someone laugh or smile or tear up or whatever it was, they were going to remember that. They're going to remember the brand better than if I, iterated for them the waist and inseam and, how high is a high rise versus a low rise. Nobody cares. You've got to move them, with emotion. And then, yes, as you move them further down the funnel, they're going to want to know more specifics about the product. But that's never going to be enough to get them out of their chair and into a store. It's just not. You think about Apple and the Think Different campaign, which was so inspiring, and all of Nike's work, which is so inspiring. If they just told you about all the technical details of the shoe, you would be bored out of your mind.
Yeah, that's, you talked about corporate communication earlier, Jennifer. And I think that's a great, what you're saying now was exactly my point there. You're describing the fact that logic makes us think, but emotion makes us act.
Yeah.
Right. And we need to feel something for these products or services before we act on them. And that's true even internally. And it's a shame that more executives don't learn the lesson you just taught, which is even internally, our communication needs to have that storytelling.
Oh yeah. And I always try. And I think the authenticity, a leader, an authentic leader can bring out some of that emotion too. But ironically, what you've just said, to go back to the COVID narrative, is actually what was done. Emotion through fear is what was conveyed, and all logic was set aside.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter if the facts flew in the face of the narrative. The narrative was maintained at any cost.
Yes.
And it worked.
Yeah, it did work. So we didn't miss what you slipped in there very quietly. What do you have going on? Sounds like you got something in the works right now.
Oh, I do. I'm working on a documentary now about the impact to children from prolonged school closures.
Oh,
We've been filming since about March.
Right. You are a Tasmanian devil, man. You never stop.
My husband would agree with you. He's finally succumbed. He's like, I'm just here to support you and help you do what you want to do. He's stopped telling me to stop and take it easy because he knows it's not my style.
Awesome. So are you in collaboration with anybody that we may recognize, or that you can divulge, or is the whole thing?
I'm happy to divulge. Probably not anyone you recognize. So I started my own production company. It's called Say Everything in February. I think I waited 3 days after I resigned and went and started. I needed to chart a new.
That's
I
awesome.
needed to chart a new course. We started production about a month or 6 weeks later. We're still filming because we're seeing how the stories unfold. We want to see how these kids are doing. I'm directing this one with a partner who I met, of all places, on Twitter. So my directing partner is Andrew James, and I have a co-producer I'm also producing, who I also met very early on during COVID in San Francisco, a fellow mom dissenter. So she's producing with us, and her name is Laura Fagan, and my husband's helping.
Nice.
It's sort of a Twitter hive mind production in a sense.
Very cool.
Fantastic. Do you have, will you be getting distribution to the same
I sure hope.
Okay.
Working on it. Yeah.
Yeah. If not, give me a call. We may be able to point you in the direction of some other distributors.
Great.
Yeah, all of and I say this all the time. Curtis won't, but Curtis was an actor, and all 3 of his daughters are in productions and on Broadway and also in movies, and so he's got lots of. So don't.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Athlete A is distributed on Netflix, which is obviously a great platform. But we definitely want a broad reach mainstream platform. There is nothing. I'm not willing to have this message today or in 2023 when we finish it be sort of shunted to the alt-right kind of universe, because that is not what it is. And it needs to be seen and viewed and understood. And really, we want to create a record of what happened to these kids with the hopes of kind of instilling in us all that this cannot happen again. Because I will tell you from talking to children across the country that the kids are not all right. They're not all right.
I agree. They're not. And I'll do it from my son personally. He was incredibly affected by this. And even in the short time that we were locked down, I mean, it was awful. The online school and the lack of socialization, and I don't think a lot of them have recovered yet.
Oh no. And if you think about, because children like ours who had every advantage and supportive families and strong Wi-Fi and all of that, they still struggled. Obviously, many suffered from the isolation and the loneliness. But for children with fewer resources or no resources, there are kids that dropped out or became so disengaged with the schooling process that they are failing. Chronic absenteeism is at an all-time high. In some schools in San Francisco, chronic absenteeism is 90%. Citywide, it's about 40% chronic. So to think that some of those kids aren't still destined to drop out is incorrect. So
thank God they built that $4 million public toilet down there.
You mean Twitter, the Twitter office?
Not that one.
I don't mean the Twitter offices as Elon is running it. I mean that whole area is
we still love it.
Well, isn't it interesting though? Just to sort of wrap up this point, I know you've got to go, Jennifer, but what's most fascinating to me, if you study even just the history of the 20th century, and as you said, the people turning each other into the Stasi, and same thing happened in simultaneously in the Soviet Union and in Germany, World War II Germany, and then in China. This immense distrust of the government that takes the government down and then becomes the new government where, we're supposed to have complete trust. And I'm surprised that in a place like California, where there is sort of perpetual, the intellectuals there have, a very healthy skepticism of corporate interest.
Not.
Well,
do.
That's my question is, why would you, knowing that this was an experimental vaccine, and, frankly, I was all for us, damming the torpedoes, full speed ahead. We didn't know what we were dealing with, and fair enough, right? Let's get something out there, but let's be critical. Let's be healthfully critical, and not overpromise, and let's acknowledge we don't know what we don't know, right? Why did that intellectual curiosity? Why did that intellectual skepticism, which is should be the hallmark of the universities, why did that just suddenly go away? And it's the hallmark of a liberal-minded education, right? Why did that just vanish?
I think all of these people that you are describing that think of themselves as the resistance, and in fact, put it in their Twitter profile with a hashtag, are in fact conformists.
Yes.
And I don't think, they challenge once the group has. So how rebellious and challenging is that? And it's astonishing to me. I feel like everything I thought, and I tell people this all the time, everything I thought the left stood for was a lie, or they failed to. They've trespassed their own values in every way imaginable. They are not anti-corporatism. They are in support of big tech now, it apparently seems, censoring citizens. They are in support of big pharma forcing not very well tested drugs on the population. They are fine with harming the most vulnerable among us through lockdowns and school closures. So it just makes me think they never really meant it. That to me is the red pilling for me. Yeah. It's, it was all bullshit to begin with. You didn't really mean it. And I think what I've come to understand is that most people would rather fit in than be right and challenge and do the right thing. They would rather fit in. Probably 75% of people, I'm making up the number, but it's something like that. Most people are obedient and will follow orders. We saw from the Milgram experiment, well over 60% of people just follow orders. If they're being told you have to do this because you have to, that's what they do. Now, with COVID, the just following orders also became the virtuous stance. And this is what's so confusing to me. Because for a population like San Francisco, and what I loved about it when I moved there in 1992 is I thought it was rebels and weirdos and people who challenged the status quo. And I felt like a weirdo. And so I felt like I fit in. And now I'm like, where are you guys? You abandoned me.
Where are my weirdos at?
Yeah, where are my weirdos at? So I don't know that I can fully explain. It'll probably be the project of my life, how that, did a transformation happen? Did they never really believe those things? Or if a transformation did happen, why? I don't know that I fully understand it. I only know that I'm very aware of it.
Just to bookmark that with the other aspects of your life that you've told stories about, I think that that courage to stand up and say, I do not concur, right? I would like to have a discussion about this. I have other ideas. I have another viewpoint. Isn't that also the diversity we're looking for in the workplace? Isn't that the courage, the individual courage that's necessary to prevent situations like happened in the story Athlete A, right? Isn't that what we're trying to instill in our
kids? Yes. Everybody says they want it, but they don't really mean it. And I don't know if there's ever really a possibility. I think, I'm Jewish. I grew up, my husband and I talk about this all the time, wondering how something like the Holocaust could ever happen. How could good people do nothing in the face of this much evil? I'm not comparing this to the Holocaust. I understand it now.
Yeah.
When you're told there is this external thing that must be feared, in fact, Jews were described as a virus, and the government offers safety in exchange for your compliance or silence. That's the mechanics. That's how it happens. I understand it now because I've sort of lived through a obviously much less horrific version of that. And I always thought, well, maybe there was something specific about the German people that is wrong. It's humans.
Yeah.
Most humans will follow directions, do what it takes to fit in. And if they're offered virtuousness in exchange for complicity, that makes it even better. And I think the percentage who will stay silent even higher. And that's what happened with COVID. You were virtuous and good and morally superior if you did not question any of these policies.
And in your German example and your Nazi example, I mean, obviously there was also the opposite side of the coin, which was the coercive threat of death or imprisonment should you aid and abet Jewish community. But here in the States and other, Western world countries, there was also coercion, right? There was also, hey, if you don't comply, you won't have a job, even if you're frontline medical staff.
Yep.
Yeah, you had to comply. I mean, I get messages from people every day. I stand with you. I have followed you from the beginning. I applaud your bravery. You'll understand I can't actually say these things publicly. And I'm like, you know what? No, I don't understand anymore. I'm losing patience with that view, because the fact is at least half of us, if not a majority, we're scratching our heads and wondering, is this really the best? Some of us more aggressively thought this is wrong, but I think there was a ton of people who wondered, who questioned and said nothing because they were very afraid of the name calling, the demonization, losing friends. And I have little patience for that. Yes, it sucks to lose friends, but come on, you're hurting people. Children are being harmed. And so I always tell people when they write me, I understand, but I'm starting to think maybe I'll say, I don't really understand. You've got to say something. Each of us in our own way. You don't have to blow up your life like I did, but challenge in the everyday. This is an example I use all the time. There are schools that still don't do parent-teacher conferences in person in December 2022 because it's too dangerous. If you don't want that, if you want to meet your child's teacher and talk about how your kid is doing, tell them you want to do it in person. They don't know if you don't say anything. Just challenge every day. Philly just reintroduced mask mandates for the youngest children, for all children, down to 2. If you don't support that, if your child is suffering from speech delays, you have to say something. This is how they manufacture consensus.
Yeah. Let us know as your project progresses how we can help, and I'd love that. If we can help to spread the word. I mean, I'm excited to see it. I think that's something definitely to look forward to.
Thanks.
Well, I think that is it for today, folks. And that's all the time we have. But Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate the time and the good talk today. Love it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So folks, you can find Jennifer on, there is like a litany of places that you could, but Levi's Unbuttoned.com. You can see her on IMDb, which maybe her new thing will be on there soon. And Wikipedia, on Twitter at Jennifer Sey, and on Instagram at Jen Sey SF. And I'm sure a ton more places, right?
Yeah, well, Twitter is where I'm most active. But if I could put a little plug in for my Substack, which is, you can find if you just search for Jennifer Sey, or Say Everything is what it's called, spelled like my last name. So I continue to write and publish musings there at Say Everything Substack.
Or you can Google her and find 10 pages of stuff where you can find her.
About how horrible I am.
No. Just find out where you're at. But thanks again so much for joining us today on The Outspoken with Scott and Curtis. We'd like to thank our producer, Brad Thomas. And if you're watching us on YouTube and enjoyed the show, please click on that like button. If you want to hear more of our podcast, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. And when you want to hear us or when a new episode comes out, go ahead and hit that bell. By the way, you can also see us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or direct on outspoken.show. And until next week, take care, everybody.
Bye for now.